Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Um, Welcome to the Real Estate Valuation Issues Due Diligence webcast. My name is Ross Prindle. I'm the Managing Director in charge of the real estate practice at Duff & Phelps, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm also going to be joined by Jim Gavin, who's head of our West Coast real estate office. He's also going to be giving you some comments on trends in the markets, as well as following up my comments on best practices for real estate valuation within the due diligence community and institutional investor community. First thing I'd like to talk about is that there's been a lot of sort of evolution of best practices that have occurred over time within the last decade. You know, if I were to go back in time around a decade ago, you know, a lot of folks were doing internal valuations. There was very little sort of guidance out there about what the best practice was, how often should they be valuing their real estate for their constituent investors, how often should they be disclosing values, and who is doing the values. It started off a while ago for primarily closed-end funds and private equity investments that we started with negative assurance, which was essentially the companies were doing, or the sponsors were doing the valuations internally, and firms like us would come in and review their work and sign off that it wasn't unreasonable. Then we moved to a step. The next step, a couple of years later, was positive assurance, which was us doing same sort of reviews, but those reviews were answering with positive results, like we believe that the results are reasonable. And since then, sort of depending on who you are and what the type of fund it is, we've moved to a combination, I would say, of positive assurance and then third-party marks, third-party valuation. For closed-end funds, generally the best practice out there has been moved from a once every 3 years external valuation to now it's an annual valuation. And because it's closed end, companies are reporting value on a quarterly basis to their investors, but the third party involvement is not as often as it needs to be. It was only once a year usually is the best practice for valuation in closed end funds for external. Open end funds is a different story. Open end funds has moved from the annual valuation to positive assurance quarterly, with sometimes, depending on the type of fund, type of open-end fund, external valuations quarterly by third parties. So what's really evolved is, you know, in the sense of transparency, you know, the community, the institutional investor community has moved to a best practice of you know, disclosing more fair value on a quarterly basis for open-end funds, where folks have the option of moving in and out of the funds as investors. And I think, you know, what has happened there is that it's been very good for the community in the sense that all the investment community is now getting sort of similar methodology and transparency on a more regular basis of valuation in funds. I think the other thing that's important to talk about here is deliverable. You know, what we have typically seen is when companies have done internal valuations themselves, they've done primarily an income approach to derive fair value of all property types, either through direct capitalization or discounted cash flow, depending on the stability of the property. when it's stable and revenue is not supposed to change much. They'll use a direct capitalization approach where you apply a market cap rate to net operating income. And when it's not as stable, where income is likely going to move a little bit in the next coming years, or the property's being developed or leased up, the discounted cash flow approach has been the appropriate approach. And what's clear to understand that fair value in these situations is not a fire sale value. It's a willing buyer, willing seller with typical marketing time, and that seller not being under any duress. As we've sort of come off of the pandemic here, or we will soon, there's certainly a lot of property types that have sold that you could classify as distressed sales, and very clear is not fair value. Fair value is, the definition of fair value has not changed. It's very important from a valuation perspective for folks to keep that in mind and to develop fair value in the context of non-duress sales, non-fire sale situations. And unfortunately or fortunately, it's very difficult, right, in certain times over the last 12 to 18 months, with a lack of sales transactions to mirror the market of a market participant who is a likely buyer of property. So it's been a little more difficult over the last 12 months, especially in 2020 was a very difficult year with a lot of property types not selling. But the good news is that we're starting to see a lot more marks, more transactions occurring, and the market's starting to normalize, and we're seeing more data points out there. Very important to mirror the market. The main approaches to value, as I sort of mentioned, are the income approach, which is direct capitalization or discounted cash flow, and the other approach to value that is very important is the sales comparison approach or market approach. In that approach, we extract from the market comparable sales and data points such as cap rates and other type of data points, multipliers, so to speak, so that we can derive a likely range of cap rate, discount rates that we can apply to our property types. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim a little bit here to talk about the market and some of the markets that we were in and property types and how they apply to market participants who are buying assets and what the markets are like for these property types. Jim, take it away.
Hey, Ross. Thanks a lot. And thanks, everybody, for joining today, this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're located. Following on Ross's comment, I mean, I think that, the important thing is deriving or determining the right approach, under the circumstances you may be working under. And there are a lot of times where as an investor or you may be at different function or different locations in terms of the time frame in terms of development, correct, for example. So, where you're under construction, there's really more of a cost method that you may want to look at on a preliminary basis, land plus improvement, up to a point where you're really ready to begin completion of construction and looking forward to occupancy or negotiations for occupancy, which would then convert you into more of an income approach. So a lot of it is dependent on where you're at in the cycle in terms of construction or condition of the property. In terms of kind of how we call them the food groups, the different investment types, again, the last 18 months, 12 to 18 months, there's been a lot of clarity in different industries as far as challenges or benefits around the results of the pandemic. One area that has benefited greatly is the industrial markets, in terms of logistics, et cetera. I guess kind of the Amazon effect, where they've made a big big splash in a lot of local markets for investments that have kind of impacted really the overall industrial markets in a lot of different areas, a lot of suburban markets and urban markets as a result of this. So we've seen a real material change in a lot of the higher density industrial markets as a result of demand for space, demand for storage, demand for logistics. And, so it really in the last year or so, there's been a substantial increase in industrial activity and industrial values from our perspective. And again, like everything else, your valuation is really a local focus, and so you really have to understand the local market. And so not in every market, for example, is going to have the same results. But again, we do find that the more populated urban locations, have benefited substantially on the industrial side. The office side is probably many of you probably aren't still back in your office at this point or going back soon. The initial concern there was, were people going to pay rent? Well, we saw actually on the office side, pretty high paybacks in terms of rent payments, and so somewhere in some urban markets up to over 90%. So I think that's been settled a little bit, and so the concerns about the office market is more about the space you need to make sure that when people return back to work, they are in a place safe and social distance as they need to, et cetera. And so with that, we've seen a lot of sublease space go on the market. So if you look at your office markets, I think a key factor you want to ask is how much sublease space is there, because the sublease space right now is a result of folks that have decided, look, we don't need as much office space as we have. We need to put it back in the market. And as a result, that's going to compete directly with existing vacant space. And so if you look at a market, if you want to look at, say, for example, a variance, it's kind of interesting in say, I'm in the Bay Area, San Francisco urban market sublease space through some input I've got from some brokerage, is probably 10 to 15% of the total space available in that market. Versus if you go down Highway 101 along the peninsula and down the Silicon Valley, that sublease space is only 2 or 3%. We've got large corporate users such as Google and Apple, et cetera, continuing to take on additional space and expanding. So you've got it's really the point there is really looking at your market, your local market, and what might be going on. And so we're seeing office markets recover pretty well, probably better than maybe we would have expected. So again, it gets down to who your tenants are they paying on time, and then what their long-term plans might be. And what we see is probably just from feedback in the markets we've seen is 2023 to 2025, depending on the market and how much sublease space, is a time that it's going to be where maybe office markets for the most part are back to where you'd like to see them. The timeline is really based on how much sublease space can be absorbed or expires during that time frame. So again, a very important thing to consider. On the housing side, we still, I think, move in two directions. Apartments, because of social distancing and because of the congestion, perhaps around living close to folks, we saw a real move out of apartments. A lot of people letting their leases expire, moving back in with family or friends or close ones that they could spend time with during this process and the shutdown, so to speak. And so we did see have seen a pretty substantial drop in apartment rents, nationwide as a result of that. But again, as the pandemic has come under more control, we've seen that recovering a little bit more recently, and see that recovering fairly quickly. Similarly for student housing, as you would expect, students didn't go back to school or didn't show up to school at all in the course of the year. So you saw a bit of decline there in occupancy. But I think what we've seen is values hold pretty steady, with the expectation of recovery here pretty soon as schools reopen and students want to get back to their class and into their classes here. So I think we see that recovering fairly well. And then senior housing, the same thing. Given the concerns of the pandemic initially, a lot of concern around safety and et cetera, and then access of family to their loved ones was very difficult. And so there was a bit of a concern around that, but we're seeing that again recover fairly well as a result of vaccinations and the end of the pandemic, in terms of its seriousness. And then the last thing, the single-family housing on the other extreme has been just, again, in many markets has taken off substantially, especially a lot of flight to the warmer markets in the South, the Floridas, Texas, et cetera. But even in some urban markets, leaving the city center, but up in top suburbs, just substantial amount of increase in pricing, home pricing, and also a kind of a flight again to the warmer markets. And also mentioning or considering Hawaii, where thinking about if you have to live someplace or you're going to be working from home on a long-term basis or on a fairly regular basis, you want to be where it's maybe the outdoor activities are a lot easier to get to, and so we see the Sun Belt type of states really doing very, very well, but that hasn't dissuaded a lot of folks actually to look at other markets that are the Montanas and the Wyomings and the Dakotas, where again it's a fairly open living style that has been attractive to a lot of people. So single family housing has stayed very strong, and we don't see any slowdown in that at all. Then moving to the more challenging markets, retail, and I would say retail and hotels. I mean, retail, we're seeing more activity around that Ross referenced problems or issues around, again, concerns around pricing in this arena. It's been fairly substantial. We have seen some deep discounts. For example, anytime you see these open boxes or large spaces opening up, usually the long-term plan is going to be somehow cutting those apart or breaking those down into smaller units. So we have seen some deep discounts in what we call big box sales, the vacant big box sales. But at the same time, substantial activity in triple net lease, fast food with drive-throughs, C-stores and gas stations, et cetera. Very substantial activity for investors in the triple net arena, and so again you have the retail is really split into that, along with very strong activity around anchored grocery store anchored and drugstore anchored retail centers. So again, you've got to look at what your investment is, what the asset class is, what the local market looks like, and again, you can find a difference on a center from one part of town to the other simply because of who the tenancy might be. And then we're seeing a pretty good comeback in restaurant business, but what's interesting about that is we're seeing a lot of it is where the owners have, or the managers have learned probably they don't need to be open 7 days a week. So what we're seeing is a lot of restaurant activity where it's maybe a Wednesday through Sunday or a Tuesday through Saturday type opening, and the challenge is a lot of trying to determine who they finding help that can keep the restaurants open, and also the profitability of being open is probably limited a little bit by that. So the retail, we're seeing a bit of a comeback in terms of some of those types of uses, but again, the larger the malls and the big boxes, as I said before, are really a challenge, and we're seeing a lot of conversions into other uses, alternate uses there, but whether it be office or health clubs or other areas around those developments. And I think that's going to maintain itself probably for a period of time. Moving on to the hotel side of things, again, it gets back to, are you urban or are you resort oriented? Again, where we see things doing very well are the destination locations, and as these states open up, we're seeing more activity there and demand around the resort side of things versus the urban core, where you're still seeing probably less than 30% occupancy in many urban convention center type of locations, and that's probably not going to change for a bit of time until some things reopen. Although I do see a lot more conferences being booked for 2022, so hopefully that'll result in some change. But again, we're looking at several years down the road before you see recovery in some of these hotel markets. So again, it's a very, very tough business right now, and there's opportunity to sell and find buyers who are looking at fairly low prices, but again, to the extent you can hold on and operate, until that time frame. Probably the better for investors at this point. But again, it takes a lot of patience, and not oftentimes it's not available to everybody. When it comes down to the dollars and cents. And then the last thing I throw in would be what I call infrastructure. Data centers. For obvious reasons, the cloud activity around calls like this and Zoom requirements and data requirements, working from home, et cetera, has been just phenomenal in terms of their results. And we've seen a lot of activity in the data center. We've seen a lot of activity of companies buying other companies, et cetera. So we're seeing a very significant amount of activity there. Other areas that have been very active also are things like marinas, where it's outdoor activities and resort level type of activity. So you look at these different types of situations, and there's always a silver lining in a lot of it for the real estate industry. It's just a matter of, again, understanding your markets and approaching them very, very consciously in terms of the statistics and the activity that's going on. So, Ross, with that, I can turn it back to you if there's anything else you want me to cover.
Sure. A few last things here. I think we talked a little bit about what's best practices with regard to valuation. Very clear that the marketplace is looking for more information on a more timely basis. But I also think that there are some rules of thumb with regard to completing valuations, whether third parties are doing it or internal valuation is done. And I think what's really been important through the last couple years, most of this year and all of last year, was spending a lot of time on getting the next 24 months of cash flows correct for properties because of all the stress with regard to the pandemic and with regard to lack of data in the marketplace. We told all of our clients that the first thing we want you to do is work really hard on getting that cash flow correct, because a lot of folks, especially in the retail area, had a lot of deferred rent issues where they were giving rent relief to folks for a certain period of time, where that would be paid back. And we spent a lot of time with our retail clients trying to understand exactly what that rental income is going to be and what their NOI is going to be, what their expenses are going to be. For example, hotels had their biggest expense in the hotel market is people and payroll, right, for cleaning and doing all these extra things that you need to now to be because of the pandemic. It's their expenses for payroll and cleaning and so on and so forth certainly went up. And I think that a lot of these sort of trends with regard to increased expenses due to cleaning and certain things like that, social distancing in office, and the way you run your business in retail, some of them are not really going to go away for a while. And we're telling our clients to, let's be realistic with, your estimation of what your budget's going to be next year for expenses. Let's get realistic with regard to your forecasting income. And, let's also not assume, especially in the retail space and the hotel space, that things are going to be just getting back to normal right away. While we do expect the end of this year is going to be much better than last year as far as income growth, so on and so forth, there still is a lot of stress in the areas of retail, senior housing, and especially in hotels that we're not going to be able to turn it around to be back like where we were prior to the pandemic right away. It's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take time to get through the recovery period. Some are estimating that retail is not going to be back in a form that it was until 2 to 3 years from now. Hotels, same situation. While hotels will revamp very quickly when business travel comes back, there's just a lot of question about what business travel is going to be, because folks are able to have Zoom meetings and do conferences that way. That, sort of the experiment of a lot of this productivity and being productive outside of the office, outside of meeting with clients and traveling, the experiment kind of worked in a lot of ways. And I think most corporations are now looking at, do we really need to spend all this money on travel and sending people places when we can likely do it, over the internet through Zoom meetings? I think there also is going to be some consternation of people meeting at big conferences again. My sense is the in-person conferences are going to come back, but people, the attendance of those and how attended they are is a question, and that's going to affect your business hotels, your convention hotels that are used to having these large conventions. So it's sort of out there a little bit as to when we're going to get this stability. The good news is some of your best Class A properties, your good regional malls that have an entertainment sort of approach and a destination spot, they're going to recover quickly. The properties that are more tertiary and tertiary markets, that are more Class B, C regional malls or shopping centers, it's very tough because they're folks looking at those are saying, wow, the NOI has eroded quite a bit, and how are we going to get these people back, these shoppers back in these markets when they got so used to ordering on Amazon or going local to get what they need. Coming back to the regional mall is going to be difficult. So our estimation with regard to those type of property types is you're going to see a lot of adapted reuse of Class B and C regional malls. They're going to move them into apartments. They're going to, I've heard adaptive reuse of big box retailers into logistics properties. Now, my sense is it's going to be, most of them are going to be redeveloped into residential. So I think, it's a big change. I think the one last thing I'd like to say is corporations are looking at their office space, across the globe there. They're saying, okay, we now had all these people working from home. They're productive. Do we think it's a great move to have them continue to work from home and never be together in the office? No. We think that their collaboration is important, and we need to bring them back. However, most companies are not going to come back in the form that they were before. There's going to be a proliferation of hoteling, and there also is going to be less office space needed. Period. So our view is there already is a decent amount of sublease space for office on the market. That's going to continue and only get sort of larger. And there will be some adaptive reuse of office as well. And you're going to also see a lot of people trade up because rents aren't going to be what they were because demand isn't what they were. So, the best office spaces will continue to be occupied. There's a bunch of amenities that are going to be needed. And that folks will be seeking high quality office space because, frankly, it will likely be available due to the sublease market that's coming forward. But I think, in closing, I think we have about 30, 40 seconds left. I just want to say that I think that if the one takeaway I'd like for people to take away from this webcast is that it's very important to be transparent these days. I think most folks would like to see transparency more than anything else, and investors would like more information than less. This is sort of the information age where people make decisions and they expect to have good information. And I think that independence is also an important part of that. So that's the things that I'd like you to take away from this webcast. But thank you very much. Appreciate your time. And this would conclude the webcast today. Thank you.